You are now listening to Season 2 of That's Life, a One Love Media production. Now here is your host, Kyle Fields.
You want to know what hell looks like? It's watching someone you love slowly disappear. Not all at once, but piece by piece. It's the little things. They stop answering calls. They start showing up late. Their eyes don't look the same. Their laugh isn't as loud. You tell yourself they're just tired, stressed, going through something. You make excuses for them until one day you can't anymore, because suddenly they're not just off. They're gone. Not physically, maybe, but emotionally, mentally, spiritually. They've been hijacked by something you can't touch, can't fight, can't reason with. And all you can do is stand there and watch. People talk a lot about addiction, but they don't talk enough about the collateral damage. The parents who wake up every day wondering if today is the day they bury their child. The partners who feel more like caregivers than lovers. The kids who grow up thinking chaos is normal. The friends who try to hang on until they can't anymore. And the hardest part, you still see them. You still catch glimpses of the person you love. They smile just like they used to, laugh at the same jokes, say the same things that sound like them, but the light behind it, it's dim. And it gets dimmer every time they use. You beg, you cry, you pray, you yell, you say things you regret. You forgive things you shouldn't have to. You say, this time will be different, even though a voice in your head whispers that it won't be. But you hope, because that's what love does. It hopes even when the logic is gone, even when your heart has been broken so many times you forget what it feels like to not be worried. Addiction doesn't just break the person using, it breaks the people who love them. It teaches you how to grieve someone who's still alive. And that might be the cruelest pain there is. Nobody teaches you how to love an addict. There's no handbook, no checklist, no YouTube tutorial that can show you how to be there for someone who's disappearing right in front of you. You want to help, you want to save them, but after a while it feels like no matter what you do, it's never enough. So you start questioning yourself. Am I enabling them? Should I be tougher? Should I have answered that call? Should I have ignored that one? It becomes a game of emotional chess, and every move feels like it's the wrong one. You give money and feel guilty. You say no and feel guilty. You go to bed worried they'll die, but feel too tired to keep trying. And then guess what? You feel guilty for that too, because loving someone in addiction isn't just painful, it's exhausting. You find yourself doing mental gymnastics every day, trying to figure out where that line is between support and survival, between compassion and codependency. And even when you think you figured it out, the rules change. They always change. Some days you feel strong, you feel clear. Other days you're crying in your car in a Walmart parking lot because they promised They were clean and you wanted to believe them, but something in your gut just knows better. And then there's the silence that comes when they cut you off because you finally set a boundary, or worse, when you cut them off because you had to. You don't stop loving them, but you learn to love them from a distance to protect your own sanity, to protect your home, your kids, your peace, and it kills you inside because no one wants to walk away from someone they love. But when addiction takes over, you're not walking away from them. You're walking away from the chaos, and you're praying to God that they find their way back. People will judge you. They'll say you gave up on them, but they don't know the nights you sat up crying, the interventions, the phone calls, the lies, the rehab visits, the relapse, the hopes, the disappointment, the love, the constant love, because even in the distance, even in the pain, that love never goes away. You just finally learn to love yourself too. As we've talked about the pain, the boundaries, the loss, and the love that surrounds addiction, I wanted to bring in a professional voice, someone that you all are familiar with because she's been on the show before, but also someone who's not only understands the clinical side of this, but who also brings compassion and clarity to the emotional toll addiction takes on families. Dr. Laura Ellick is a licensed clinical psychologist with over 2 decades of experience helping people navigate trauma, addiction, grief, and healing. She's worked with individuals battling addiction as well as the families who love them, those caught in a storm, watching someone else they care about slip through their fingers. She's here with us today to talk about addiction through the lens of those who live around it, love through it, and sometimes lose to it. Dr. Ellick, thank you so much for being here again, once again, with us.
Hi, Kyle. It is always a pleasure to be here and to have these conversations with you.
So, my first question is, I sent you both episode 1 and 2 to kind of prepare so you would know where I was coming from when we did this interview. And my question is, were you surprised by how I approached it, or were you just like, oh, this is regular Kyle content?
I think everything that you do with a twist of Kyle to it, right? So, your approach is always compassionate, of course, but also talking about the reality of the situation, and let's not dance around what are really truly significant issues to people that have been ignored or downplayed for far too long.
Absolutely. The reason that, I approached it the way I did is because obviously I am a recovering addict. And, part 2, what we're going to be talking about today, I've lost people to addiction. And the one thing that I want people to know is when it comes to addiction and recovery, we as recovering addicts, we don't beat around the bush. And I wanted to make that clear so that way anybody that was listening that may have doubted where I was coming from knew within the first episode of season 2 that, hey, he's real, and we can benefit from him, or we can go to him for help if we need it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I put a lot of work and a lot of emotion into this, especially the first one where I talked about, myself as being an addict in recovery. But that being said, let's go ahead and get to the meat and potatoes. So, from your clinical perspective, what's the emotional toll addiction takes on people surrounding the addict, especially those who are actively trying to help or to hold on?
Well, it's really funny that you mention this because I'm actually working. on a series of, I guess you would call them one pagers, that I hope is going to turn into an ebook, just about how to help someone with an addiction, right? And I think one of the difficulties in helping someone who is struggling with an addiction is that there is so much emotion attached to it. There's anger, there's sadness, there's fear, there's so much going on there, because there's the anger and the frustration at the addiction piece and the behavior and the repetitive nature and the destruction. And then there could also be, but that's my kid, or that's my brother, or that's my best friend, and I'm so sad and I'm so worried. And that combination with all of those different emotions can really take a toll, because we're going back and forth between feeling bad and maybe wanting to cut someone some slack, and being angry and needing to uphold certain boundaries and limits, which are absolutely essential.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. And I talk a lot about um, the not just setting boundaries, but the pain of having to set those boundaries. And, I think people that don't or have never had to deal with this sort of thing, they tend to overlook a lot of the time spent, meaning, you know, as somebody who is trying to help an addict, the 3 a.m. phone calls, showing up and then feeling bad because you couldn't show up and they made you feel bad. People who have never had to deal with that won't understand that. And that's a part of why I wanted to get this out, because I- it's important for people, whether you're dealing with an addict or you never have, because at some point in your life, and I hate to say this, but at some point in your life, you will cross paths with an addict. And whether you choose to get to know them or not, at least you'll have the tools, so to speak, to be able to help them in a way, but also, keep peace with yourself.
For sure, for sure. And that's the balance, right?
Yeah, and that's the balance that nobody ever tells you how hard it is to keep.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Hmm. Yeah, one of the things that, when we're dealing with someone who's struggling with an eating disorder, we'll often ask the prospective patient, what percentage of your day is spent thinking about food, eating, weight, whatever. We don't seem to ask that question in addiction of the families, but I wouldn't doubt for a second that if you asked a family member what percentage of your day is spent thinking about, worrying about, strategizing, anything related to your loved one's addiction, I'm sure we're close to 100%, if not 100% all the time.
Absolutely. I mean, I talk about the person that I lost. Her name was Mary. There wasn't an hour of my day or a day that went by in a week that I wasn't worried, that I wasn't thinking, okay, is she good? Does she need anything? And, you know, if she or if she doesn't need something, but she's trying to con me because, she's relapsed, how bad am I going to feel for telling her no?
Yes, exactly.
So
Absolutely, exactly.
what are some of the most common mental health struggles you see in people who love someone in addiction, like anxiety, depression, trauma, PTSD, stuff like that?
It's so individual, because there are people who come into a relationship with their own stuff already. So just loving someone with an addiction may ramp up any anxiety or depression that you may already be experiencing. And then there's the mental illness or the emotional fallout of being with someone who has an addiction, even if you didn't have a mental health issue in the past. It would be impossible to say that you're not going to experience some sort of anxiety, depression, maybe even PTSD, if you've seen a loved one OD and then be revived, or you had to revive them, or which was an experience that happened with a patient of mine who had to revive a roommate. So it just really runs the spectrum. And that's why they really call it a family disease, because no one is untouched.
Right. Absolutely. And again, speaking from both sides of, the spectrum, so to say, we use that word
Mm-hmm.
lightly for this, but speaking from both sides of the spectrum, you're absolutely right about that. There are times when my addiction was so bad that I made it everybody else's problem. In turn, that just put so much pressure and anxiety on my loved ones who also felt the need to try and help every little way they could, not knowing that it was actually just feeding my addiction, and what I was feeding them was a line of bullshit.
And that's the codependency piece that we see, right? Is families who are, or loved ones who are overcompensating, who are trying to manage it, keep everything under their control, manage the other person's emotions, have a hard time with the setting of the boundaries, fall victim to the manipulation all the time, which is why it's so important for the family members to get appropriate help as well.
Yes, absolutely. And I've spoken to a lot of people who have tried to help an addict, and once again, unfortunately, it doesn't always work. Sometimes the relapse gets them, but I completely forgot where I was going with that. That's great.
It'll come back, it always does.
That's right. It will. In the middle of probably the next question, I'll be like, oh, wait, before I forget again. All right. So until I remember what I was going to say, let's go to the next question. There's often this deep sense of guilt in loved ones. Could I have done more? Did I enable them, which we were just talking about? Was it my fault? What would you say to someone battling that internal dialogue?
That is such a tough one. But at the end of the day, you are not responsible for another person's behavior. And that's simply what it is, right? And people will say, yes, but I did this. Yes, but I did that. And I get that. I understand that. But at the end of the day, the person who has the addiction also has the responsibility to take ownership of his or her choices. If you grew up in a toxic home environment, you have a obligation to yourself then to get help for that. Somehow you chose addiction. Somehow maybe you chose to numb out instead of going through it by talking to people about it. Maybe you chose to isolate instead. So I'm very careful about not blaming the person, but talking about the behavior,
Right.
because it's the behavior change that is really important. And really, for someone who's an addict, behavior is a choice every moment of every day, correct?
Absolutely, it is. There's a lot of people that, you know, that have never had to deal with this that think that, oh, well, they're on drugs and they don't know what they're doing or they don't know what they're thinking. Wrong. Absolutely wrong. Us addicts, we are some of the most manipulative people out there. We could sell a ketchup popsicle to a woman in white gloves if she would give us money to feed our habit. That's absolute truth. And people who are just starting to get into trying to help an addict, they need to know that not every time we call and cry for help, we really need it. But we're so convincing that you'll never know when the real call comes in for help until it's too late. And that's why, people who are trying to help often do too much, so to speak.
We overcompensate.
Overcompensate. You get burnt out because once again, We are manipulative. And when we need it, when we need that fix, we will say anything and everything to anybody and everybody to get that sympathy, to get that fix. It's just the truth. And I'm not speaking bad on addicts because I'm a recovering one, but it is the truth. And when you get clean, guys, you'll understand that I was right. And that's that.
Yeah, and I describe it as, yes, there are contributing factors in every household. Contributing factors, whether it's trauma, whether it's family dysfunction, right? There are contributing factors, but at the end of the day, how someone chooses to deal with them or not deal with them is up to them. So I think, and I think I've talked about this, that I had an eating disorder. There were contributing factors to my eating disorder, but the choice at the end of the day with what I was going to do with food, that was me. Nobody
Right.
else was making me do that. That was me, until I decided that was not going to be me anymore.
Exactly. And the thing about addiction or eating disorders, what have you, anything that starts out mentally, our brain is really really good at making us believe in the moment that there is no other choice. I spoke in the first episode that people will hear about, at some point the drug goes from being something to help numb everything, because that's what it does. It's not, we're not chasing fun when we're getting high. It's really just numbing something from our past that we couldn't get over without it, and our brain was like, hey, this thing works to forget everything, right?
It works until it doesn't.
Exactly. And but that's what I was going to say is our brain gets really really good at making us believe that we need it. So therefore, we start to convince other people that, hey, listen, it's not me, it's the drugs. And that's where the disconnect comes, because while us as addicts are trying to explain, you know, what's going on or explain why we're doing something, at the same time, our brain is saying, hey, no, 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 don't say too much. Don't say too much, or they'll make you get help. And this wonderful numbness will go away and you'll have to deal with your problems sober. And that is scary. It is.
It is. It is very scary. And so I don't want to take that away too, that it's scary for both sides, because family members don't exactly know what's going to happen once the person gets sober either. And that's a whole different discussion of what happens when the identified patient actually decides not to be the identified patient anymore.
Right. Right. And, you know, I think, and for me personally, looking at it from somebody who's lost a loved one to addiction, we look at it, okay, they got clean. That's good. I'm happy for them. I'm filled with so much joy. But what if they relapse? What if what if all of this work that I've helped them get to this point, and something triggers them and they relapse? And what if that relapse, like Mary's, was her last?
Yeah.
You know? And that actually brings us to the next question, which is, when someone loses a loved one to addiction, how does that grief differ from other forms of loss? Are there stages or emotions that are unique to that kind of death?
I think grief is individual for each person. Like, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross has talked about stages of death and dying, and people have talked about, stages of grieving, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. But it's not a linear travel through those stages, and you can go back and forth. But really, when someone dies of, let's say, cancer, Yes, there's going to be grieving, but it's also an expected death. So there's a different way of coping with that. You perhaps have some more time to be able to say the things that you want to say to get some closure. When there's an unexpected death, whether by suicide or by overdose, there's often the guilt of what if? What if I had said this? What if I had done this? If you are with a friend, they overdose and die and you don't, there can also be survivor's guilt. Or let's say you both bought some stuff from the same dealer and they got bad stuff and you didn't. The possibilities are endless, but the guilt and the shame of, let's say, being with an addict when your friend dies and you're an addict too, or whatever, there's a higher level of, oh my God, did I do something to contribute to this? Which is also going to set you up for maybe more use, right? Because now you have to cope with all of these other feelings of guilt and shame and blame. Um, yeah,
And
it's
that's a lot more stuff that your brain doesn't want to deal with.
right. Right. Exactly. So I think it's a little bit more complicated just due to the nature of the death. And look, let's just talk about it in all honesty, too. It shouldn't be this way, but there's a lot of shame still surrounding death from an overdose or death from suicide than there is when someone fought a brave battle against cancer or a brave battle against Lou Gehrig's disease. And I'm not saying that those people did not fight a brave battle, but someone has got to have fought for a really long time to make the decision to commit suicide.
Right. Right. And, you know, so I just want to touch on what you said about fighting a brave battle, because what most people don't realize about addicts and what's rarely ever talked about because of that kind of cone of shame, we'll call it, is we fight battles. We fight really, really hard battles every day that we choose. So by the time that this airs, I will be 671 days sober, clean.
Woo.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm proud of it. And but like I say in my opening remarks in episode 1, there's going to be people that aren't proud of it. They're going to say, "Okay, so I should be happy and I should be proud that I never touched the stuff." All right, well, that's cool. I'm happy for you. I'm glad that you could be perfect. But what they don't realize is their remarks, their comments could literally send me into a relapse. And then if I relapse, then all of a sudden I'm not able to be trusted. I'm a liar. I'm never going to change, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But every day that I wake up and I choose sober is another battle won, and not throwing shade on anybody that has cancer. So anybody listening, please don't think that. But eventually that cancer will either be gotten rid of or will take your life. Choosing not to use a drug that has turns you into a different person every single day, in my opinion, is a little harder battle than having cancer. And like I said, that's my opinion. I'm not throwing shade on anybody that has cancer. That's just how I feel.
Yeah, I would say there's definitely a difference in the types of battles for sure. There are breast cancer walks. There are walks for lupus. There's just still so much shame around addiction being a choice. And yes, we talked about behavior, and sometimes behavior is a choice, but we also know that the substances themselves are addictive. So it's a loop.
Yeah. And your brain doesn't tell you how addictive it is
Right.
until it's already too late. And then it's like, how the hell do I get out of this? And your brain's saying, you don't, we're just not going to feel today.
And I think on this, it's again, as you said, we're not throwing shade on anybody else, but let's just have some equivalence. Let's just have some openness that these are real problems that real families deal with all the time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what myths do you most often encounter about grief related addiction? Hold on. Let me just a sec. There's a child that is upset right now. Okay, maybe. Let's try this again. What myths do you most often encounter about grief related to addiction loss? And how do those myths harm the healing process?
I think we talked a little bit about just some myths about people who use, right? And so, I've heard a lot of blame the victim type. Well, what do you expect? He was an addict. So it's like, why should you even feel grief? You knew this was coming, right? A lot more judgmental. Not always, but sometimes. Even for families where there's a suicide, let's say, there's often secrecy, so you can't even grieve openly.
Right.
And there may be, well, I've heard this way more times than I would even want to say is, well, that person was a coward.
Yeah, yeah. There's nothing cowardice about suicide, and that yeah, yeah. I've been told that I was a coward when I tried to take my life due to my mental illness. Yeah, that's not the coward's way out. That's a way to get everything that we've been trying to get help on can't that we feel nobody can help us. That's our way of getting it all to all stop. I s Yeah,
Yeah, so I think anything that can complicate the openness of the grieving process and prevent you from getting appropriate support, that's going to make things a little bit more complicated.
yeah. So we touched on this a little bit, but many families feel judged either for how they handled the addiction or how they're handling the grief. How can we as a society be better at supporting the families of addicts during the addiction and after a loss?
We need to just tap into our capacity for compassion. Again, no family has asked for this. No individual has asked for this. Nobody asks to have a family member with an addiction. Nobody asks to have an addiction themselves. And it's very easy to Monday morning quarterback or to say, well, why didn't you kick your kid out? I would have kicked my kid out. I would have done this. But you actually never know what you will do unless you're in the situation yourself.
Exactly. The people that say, "Oh, well, I would kick my kid out, or I would do this, or I would do that," clearly has never had to deal with that issue because when it comes down to it, once again, us addicts are very manipulative. I don't care that the meanest person could say, "Oh, I'd kick my kid out," but when your kid is looking at you, crying, and saying, "I'm sorry, I can change. Just give me another chance." Guess what you're going to do? Give
Right.
them another chance.
Right.
Why? Because you're their parent, their guardian, their loved one, whatever. And at the end of the day, you want them close to you instead of out on the streets where you can't control, or what you think you can't control, what they're doing.
And I've heard people say that too. I would rather enable a little bit and make sure I know my kid is coming home or has a safe place to land than to kick my kid out and realize that he is probably going to be on the street doing God knows what and increasing the likelihood that he will die.
And unfortunately, while that is a very noble thing to do, it's also very damning to the addict because they know that if they as long as they say the right thing, or they pull at the right heartstring, you're going to keep doing it.
Absolutely. And I'm not saying that that's the right thing to do. And every situation is a little bit different, obviously, but these are the things that people go through and the confusion they go through, especially because, listen, there is no one real standardized way to treat someone, right? I mean, there are some ideas, some things that actually work, but for some people, kicking a kid out actually works. For some people, it's not going to work. And it depends on a whole host of circumstances that only the family member and their treatment professionals can decide for them.
Absolutely. I mean, you hit it right on the head. Is every everybody is different, which means every healing plan, every recovery plan, everything is going to be different for every person. It's not going to be the same treatment plan or what have you. And I've been to some NA meetings where, it's I wouldn't say boring, but it didn't fit me. And it to people who don't understand an NA meeting, they can be pretty boring, but it also depends on the people that you have in the group and who you have leading the group. Some group leaders aren't for everybody. Not every NA is going to be for every addict. There is one, I think it's life recovery or something like that. It's strictly online. You join through Zoom, and I mean, it's just it's based here in Florida, but the people who run it are people like everyday people. Like, they're not executives who got caught with cocaine and now they have to be in this group. That they speak real, so like they speak like me. And for somebody like me, I need somebody who's just going to be like, "Hey, this is what's going on. This is why you're here, and this is what we're going to do to help. If you don't like it, find another damn group." That's what
Right.
I'm about. I like the
Mhm.
straightforward. I don't like the whole beating around the bush. Hey, listen, just pray and say the serenity prayer and God's going to take care of you. Yeah, I know that. But I need somebody that I can call at 3 a.m. and say, "Hey, I'm not doing so well. I'm about to go buy an 8 ball."
Mhm.
I can say that to God, and I can choose not to listen if he gives me an answer that says, "Don't do that." I'm pretty sure he said do it.
Yeah.
But if I have somebody on the phone that I can call and they say, "Hey, listen, dumbass, you're going to screw up everything if you go out and you buy cocaine." And I'm going to be like, "Hey, you know what? You're right." But once again, not everybody likes that kind of style. Some people prefer the more soft and, laid back type of recovery. And I can't have that because I'm too hard headed. And yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you have to tailor it.
Yeah. With, COVID and all that and so give me a second, let me collect my thoughts here. So during COVID, most NA groups had to go online, go virtual. So I really I got to, get my choosing of groups that I wanted to be or that I wanted to be a part of or go to, which was different from pre-COVID because I'm epileptic, which means I can't drive. So my options of groups were very limited. But the fact that so many recovery systems and recovery groups decided to stay virtual or keep a virtual outlet, I really think is what's going to be able to help people who are looking for, you know, for change or looking for recovery. Because I'll be the first to say it, I am not good in groups like face to face. I'm just not. I'm not a
Mhm.
talker. I'm awkward, you know, but you put me behind a screen and I will tell you my whole damn life story. I mean, shit, I already have with you. So
That's right. That's right. But you tell a good story.
I have been told that I am a pretty good storyteller.
Mhm.
Of course, that came from my mom when I tried making up this story about why I got suspended from school, but that's a different story. So, what are some signs that someone grieving an addiction related death may need support or intervention?
I think anybody who is grieving an addiction death, an overdose, a suicide, any sudden kind of death, likely should speak to somebody because there's going to be complicated feelings. There just is. And as I was saying before, when it's a suicide, listen, a suicide can also create its own complications if there's a suicide with no note. So you and I spoke about this when we were talking about school shootings, where, oftentimes you're just trying to piece together what was going on in that person's head. So the fact of not having any closure from someone who overdoses, was it accidental or was it deliberate? Sometimes we don't know that either. Was a suicide an accidental suicide, like they just meant to act out and they took it too far? So I think the grief, is definitely complicated. And certainly I would point someone who is really struggling with any acceptance or self blame to seek out additional support for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, there's tons of places and clinical psychologists like yourself that are within a stone's throw. Honestly, I think, in my opinion, getting help is going to be a lot easier once, like you said, people stop treating it as, something taboo or something that you should be ashamed of. Because at the end of the day, loss is loss. And grief of loss of a loved one, whether they had cancer or whether it was due to addiction or just flat out, they just stopped breathing one day. Grief from loss is the same all the way around. You just sometimes you grieve a little harder for,
Hmm.
certain situations. And addiction is often referred to as the illness that kills you before it actually kills you. You watch this person that you love that's, so bright and colorful and full of life, and you watch them transform into this person that you don't even know. The addiction is taking them from you, and there's nothing that you can do. And that's usually what it feels like. And sometimes you really can't do anything.
And the other thing I want to point out is, because I don't think people talk about this enough, is there may actually be some sense of relief. And I think that is completely appropriate. Relief as in, okay, this person is finally at peace. We're not happy with, the outcome, obviously, but they're not suffering anymore. you know
Right.
People who, whatever they've done with addiction, they've just not been able to kick it. Sometimes the families can help themselves feel better by saying, look, the fight is over.
Yeah. And I completely agree with that. We need, as a society, we need to get better at letting people know that it's okay to feel relief when, when it happens. You don't have to feel bad because you feel relieved.
Exactly.
We get it. We understand. But we need more people like you and I to actually let people know, it's okay. And it's okay for you to grieve out of process, so to speak. There's really no manual for dealing with the loss. Yeah, dog. There's no manual for dealing with the loss of somebody who was addicted to drugs.
Right.
It's just, but until we can get people to stop making it a taboo thing and to actually talk about it, we're just gonna see more deaths from addiction, and I hate to say it, but more suicide due to somebody dying from addiction, because ultimately, if you can't talk to anybody and those feelings keep piling up, there's usually only a couple things that you resort to. One of them was the thing that killed the person you loved, and the other one is just going to make it stop.
Right. Right.
And you don't,
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
yeah, I was just going to say, then you have to choose. Do you want to be seen as the person who, you fought for so long and said, no, they're not that person, they're not that person? Or do you just decide to take your life? Hold on. Or do you just decide to take your own life? And I mean, really, you won't have to worry about anybody talking shit about you because you'll be dead, I hate to say it that bluntly, but it's true.
Mm-hmm.
But that's where it leads to. You get one of two options if you can't talk to somebody.
Right. Right. And I think what's interesting, and I think we need to make this point. I was doing some research, and according to Pew Trust, having drug and alcohol addiction increases the risk of suicide. So the risk of suicide is 8.1 times higher for people who have alcohol and drug use. 8.1 times. And so, even with the suicide itself, there was a statistic that said in 2022, for every completed suicide, there were 32 people who also attempted, and more than 250 people who just thought about it but didn't act on it. So, we don't even know what the real numbers are.
Right. Yeah. And we actually talked about that in the school shooting episode
Right?
as well. And that's absolutely crazy to think about it. For every one for every one suicide that happens, there are 32 more people thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
But those people who are thinking about it are so afraid to reach out to somebody because of the stigma behind suicide and how they're labeled or how they think they'll be labeled, that they don't reach out to anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And that itself is a crime, in my opinion, but that's for another conversation. All right, that brings us to our last question. What encouragement would you give to someone who's still holding on, trying to love someone in addiction without losing themselves in the process?
You have got to keep your own life going, honey. You have got to make sure that the addiction does not take over your entire life, which it has a tendency to do. So that means, you know what? If you were supposed to go out together with friends and your partner is too drunk to go out, you go out on your own. Don't risk your job to go pick up somebody who's drunk at jail. They can wait till you get done with work. They can wait. So it's all about being compassionate, but also firm. You can love someone and wish that they get the help, and by the same token, not have your life be destroyed in the process.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. Dr. Ellick, thank you so much for coming in and sharing your opinions and your wonderful, wonderful knowledge with us on this subject. Tell everybody where they can find you.
So you can find me at www.lauraellick.com, and you can catch my podcasts from Mayhem to Mindset with Dr. Laura on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, actually, as well as my new podcast with Mark Cantor, who is an addiction interventionist. And that podcast is called I Wish I Had the Balls. So, and that's about codependency and people pleasing. So that may actually fit in very well. And for anybody who reaches out to me on my website, I've actually just developed a 5-point talking points paper on how to help someone with addiction. And I can get that to you free if you send me a message on my website.
That is absolutely amazing. Also, make sure you check out the episode that I was on of hers, which was it last week, 2 weeks ago?
Yeah, absolutely. You got to check that out. That was a great episode with some awesome music.
Absolutely. And I had so much fun there.
It was.
Dr. Ellick, thank you so much once again. And until next time, do you, but do it with love and affection. We just heard what Dr. Ellick had to say, and I have to say, every single time I sit down and talk with her, it always makes me feel refreshed. I always leave our conversations feeling better about myself because what I didn't realize is that I needed that talk just as much as everyone else listening needed that talk. But now we're going to get in to the harder part of addiction through the eyes of those that love us. Now we're going to talk about the goodbye you never wanted to say. Because sometimes the worst happens. Sometimes the call comes in the middle of the night and your whole world changes with one sentence. I'm so sorry. They're gone. And just like that, the hope that carried you this far is shattered. The comeback story you were rooting for, it never got written. You play the last conversation over in your head, what you said, what you didn't say, what you wish you'd screamed louder. Or maybe what you regret saying when you were just so damn tired. You remember every rehab, every relapse, every moment you thought they were finally getting better. And now? Now you're left with a funeral, an obituary, and an ache that feels like it'll never end. People try to comfort you. They'll say things like they're in a better place, or at least they're not suffering anymore, and you nod because that's what you're supposed to do. But inside you're screaming, I just wanted them here, alive, whole, sober, laughing, breathing. Grieving someone who died from addiction is a special kind of pain because you're not just mourning the person you lost, you're mourning all of the versions of them that addiction stole. The birthdays they missed, the milestones they never reached, the promises they couldn't keep, the potential that was always there but buried underneath the weight of a disease no one saw coming until it was too late. You wonder if you did enough, if you could have said the one thing that would have changed everything. But let me tell you something. You loved them. You showed up. You fought beside them in a war they nor you asked for. And their death is not your failure. It's the tragedy of a broken system, of a deadly disease, of a world that doesn't always understand what addiction is. So this is the part. This is for the parents who had to bury a child, for the siblings who lost their best friend, for the partners who carry grief wrapped in memories, for the kids who still wait by the door. And this is for Mary, the soul that I live for, a girl who lit up every room she entered, who battled demons most people never saw, and who didn't make it back. Mary, this episode is for you, for the you that was still fighting, for the you that laughed too loud and dreamed too big, for the you that deserved more time. We love you, and we're still telling your story. If you're listening to this right now and you haven't lost someone, if your loved one is still breathing, still fighting, still somewhere out there trying to find their way back, this is for you. You might feel like you're at a breaking point, like you've said everything there is to say, like there's no more love left to give. But let me tell you something. Your love, your presence, it still matters. Even when they don't respond, even when they lie, even when they push you away. You don't have to fix them. You don't have to carry the recovery on your back, but your existence in their life, your boundaries, your honesty, your voice could be the thread that keeps them from unraveling. And if you're holding boundaries right now, if you've had to step away to protect your peace, I see you too. That choice doesn't make you cold. It doesn't make you heartless. It makes you human. There is no right way to love someone through addiction. There's only your way. The way that keeps you going. The way that lets you live. And if you're someone who has come through the other side, who's watched someone recover and rebuild, you know it's possible. You know that healing can happen, and that every scar along the way only proves how hard you fought. So to the parents still hoping for the call, to the partners holding space in a bed that feels too big, to the kids praying their parents come home, and to the friends who stay up late just to be someone's lifeline, I'm telling you this. You are seen, you are strong, you are allowed to feel everything. Anger, grief, hope, exhaustion, joy, and you are not alone. We walk this journey together from both sides, with truth and with love, because this isn't just a story about addiction. This is a story about survival, about resilience, and about the people who never stop loving even when it hurts. So that's it for part 2 of our season premiere. 2 episodes that weren't just stories, they were truth. The kind that stings, the kind that stays, the kind that needs to be said. If you've loved someone through addiction, or you've lost someone to it, or you are someone climbing your way back from rock bottom, I hope this episode reminded you that you are not alone. Not now, not ever. And as we continue this second season, the sophomore year, we're not pulling punches. We're going deeper. We're asking the uncomfortable questions. We're getting real. So next week, we're slowing it down, but digging in. We're asking one of the most important, complicated, misunderstood questions out there. What does it actually mean to be a good person? Because in a world full of opinions, performance, and judgment, we're going to unpack what goodness really looks like. Until then, be safe, be gentle with yourself, and be honest about where you are, because healing can't happen without truth. And truth, that's the start to a beautiful life. I'm Kyle Fields. Goodbye.
Season 2 of That's Life is hosted and researched by Kyle Fields and written by Mary Rodriguez. Production and editing by One Love Media. All rights reserved. Don't forget to like and subscribe to this show and all One Love Media productions. Also, make sure you check out Dr. Laura's podcast, From Mayhem to Mindset with Dr. Laura, available on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and YouTube. For more information about Dr. Ellick's work, visit www.lauraellick.com.